Memorial of St. Bernard, Abbot and Doctor of the Church.
A reading from the Book of Judges. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. He passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and through Mizpah-Gilead as well. And from there he went on to the Ammonites. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. "If you deliver the Ammonites into my power," he said, "whoever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites shall belong to the Lord. I shall offer him up as a burnt offering." Jephthah then went on to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his power, so that he inflicted a severe defeat on them. From Aroer to the approach of Minnith, 20 cities in all, and as far as Abel-Keramim. Thus were the Ammonites brought into subjection by the children of Israel. When Jephthah returned to his house in Mizpah, it was his daughter who came forth, playing the tambourines and dancing. She was an only child. He had neither son nor daughter besides her. When he saw her, he rent his garments and said, "Alas, daughter, you have struck me down and brought calamity upon me, for I have made a vow to the Lord and I cannot retract." She replied, "Father, you have made a vow to the Lord. Do with me as you have vowed, because the Lord has wrought vengeance for you on your enemies, the Ammonites." Then she said to her father, "Let me have this favor. Spare me for 2 months, that I may go off down the mountains to mourn my virginity with my companions." "Go," he replied, and sent her away for 2 months. So she departed with her companions and mourned her virginity on the mountains. At the end of the 2 months, she returned to her father, who did to her as he had vowed. The word of the Lord.
The responsorial psalm. The response is, "Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will." Blessed the man who makes the Lord his trust, who turns not to idolatry, or to those who stray after falsehood. Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will. Sacrifice or oblation you wish not, but ears open to obedience you gave me. Burnt offerings or sin offerings you sought not. Then said I, "Behold, I come." Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will. In the written scroll it is prescribed for me, to do your will, O my God, is my delight, and your law is within my heart. Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will. I announced your justice in the vast assembly. I did not restrain my lips, as you, O Lord, know. Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus again in reply spoke to the chief priests and the elders of the people in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon the invited guests to the feast, but they refused to come. A second time he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those invited, behold, I have prepared my banquet. My calves and fattened cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to the feast.' Some ignored the invitation and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then the king said to his servants, 'The feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy to come. Go out, therefore, into the main roads and invite to the feast whomever you find.' The servants went out into the streets and gathered all they found, bad and good alike, and the hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to meet the guests, he saw a man there not dressed in a wedding garment. He said to him, 'My friend, how is it that you came in here without a wedding garment?' But he was reduced to silence. Then the king said to his attendants, "Bind his hands and feet and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen." The Gospel of the Lord.
August 20th, the Memorial of St. Bernard. The first reading comes from Judges 11:29-39. We hear about a warrior named Jephthah who is fighting the enemies of Israel, the Ammonites. And he says, "If you deliver the Ammonites, then I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my home when I return home." Well, he had a beloved daughter, and unfortunately, she is the first one to come out the door. He is heartbroken, but she insists, "You've made this promise, we have to keep our promises to God." Obviously, the story was written about a time in the history of Israel when human sacrifices were still practiced. The passage is not commending Jephthah for a foolish, rash promise, but rather commends the daughter for the fact that she supports her father even in her own death, because this is what has been promised to the Lord. Now, at the end of the story, we hear about how virgins go into the hill country to mourn the virginity of Jephthah's daughter for 2 months. This is what is called an etiology. There was a folk practice for virgins to go into the hillside for 2 months to mourn the virginity of somebody. This is the story that explains why they did this. Very often in primitive societies, there were customs that the people didn't fully understand. And so a story had to be made up to explain that particular custom. This is a messy story, and what can we learn from it? The idea of dedicating everything to the Lord, even that which we hold most dear. Because in fact, we might not sacrifice a member of our family, but if we're going to follow the Lord, sooner or later, we'll have to love the Lord more than that person. It might be a question of having to go to a foreign land to do something as a missionary. It might be simply the question of returning the gift of this person back to the Lord when the Lord calls that person to come home to heaven. To not try to hold on to the person, but to be generous and to realize that God has given us the gift of this person for a time. Now the time is ended. And so instead of being filled with resentment, we're filled with a sense of gratitude. The Gospel comes from Matthew 22, 1-14. This is a parable about a man who is a king, and he throws a feast for his son's wedding. Those invited don't come, even though the king sends out messengers twice. So what does the king do? He's furious. He kills them. And then he invites people from the waysides, people who hadn't been invited. And they come and enjoy the feast. But one of them's not dressed in a wedding garment. Now, we should ask ourselves, the poor guy who's been called from the wayside, of course he's not dressed in a wedding garment. But the answer is that wedding garments were available at the entrance to these feasts. So if he wanted, he could have easily dressed up that way. He chose not to, and therefore he's tossed out. Lesson number 1, not everyone who's called will respond, and that is on their conscience. Remember, the Gospel of Matthew has a lot of parables about the final judgment, that God will give us that which we have chosen. And if we've chosen selfishness, if we've chosen isolation, then that's our reward. Selfishness and isolation, which we call hell. Second, that if we're called, it means a change. We have to put on that wedding garment. We have to be willing to celebrate the goodness of God. We can't keep going like nothing's changed, because something profound has changed. We belong to God. We have to dress the part. And may God bless us.